here we're going to look at converting fractions into percentages. So we already know that a percentage is just a part of 100 or a fraction of 100. So if I say something like 30%, what I mean by that is 30 out of a total of 100 possible parts. Or if I say 1%, I know that that means 1 out of 100. So we can easily change between fractions that have a denominator of 100 to their equivalent percentage, because that's literally what a percentage means. But if we have other fractions, like let's say 1/2, it becomes a little bit trickier because we now have a denominator that isn't 100. We have a denominator of 2. So because a percentage has to be out of 100, to write the equivalent percentage, we need to find what half of 100 is. We know that half of 100 is 50. So 1/2 could be written as 50%. I could write 1/4, and I know that 1/4 of 100 is 25, because 4 lots of 25 go into 100. So 1/4 could be written equivalently as 25%. Now, those ones weren't too tricky, but we could have all sorts of different fractions. We don't always know what a fraction of 100 is going to be off the top of our heads. So we need to work out some sort of operation we can use. So when you see of written in a maths problem, what of actually means is to multiply. If I say I want 2 groups of 3, I'm saying I want 2 times 3. 2 groups of 3 is the same as 2 lots of 3. The same thing applies to fractions. If I say I want 1/4 of 100, what I'm actually saying is I want 1/4 times 100. Or if I'm saying I want 1/2 of 100, I'm really just doing 1/2 times 100. So of and times are used interchangeably in maths. So what that means is to find a percentage from a fraction, all we have to do is take the fraction and multiply it by 100. So the percentage is the fraction times 100, and then we just attach a percent sign at the end. So like with this first one of 1/2 times 100, we got 50. So 1/2 is equal to 50%. We're going to go through 2 different methods that we can do this. The first is probably slightly easier, and it's going to be using a calculator. So if we have our scientific calculator, I've got a Casio version here. We can change, we'll do a few different ones, but we can change any fraction we want into a percentage nice and easily on a calculator. So let's start with 3/8. If I want to change that into a percentage, all I have to do is on my calculator, 3/8, just move my cursor across, times by 100 equals, I've gotten 75/2 there. If I just press my fraction to decimal button here, the one little S and D on it, comes up with 37.5, which is how I'm going to write it. So that's going to be 37.5%. We'll do a second one, 4/5. Now I'm going to times that by 100 so that I can make it into a percentage. And using my calculator, just clear it there, 4/5, move the cursor across, times 100, and it's just come up as 80, so that's going to be 80%. And one final question using the calculator. This one's a mixed numeral. So it's got a whole number part. So when I times it by 100, because the fraction is bigger than one whole, it's going to be bigger than 100% because 100% would be one whole, and we've got more than one whole. So to type in a mixed numeral, we need to press the Shift key first, and you can see the little S will pop up in the top left-hand corner, and then press the fraction key. And if you do that, a little extra box will pop up in front of the fraction on your screen, so then you can type all three parts of the fraction in, 1 1/4. We'll move across, we'll times it by 100, and that equals 125. So it's going to be 125%. So 100% would be one whole, so we've got 25% more than a whole. Now, that's how we can do it on a calculator, but sometimes we don't always have a calculator. So what we can do is we can use equivalent fractions sometimes. Now, you might remember equivalent fractions are those ones that have the same value, but are represented by different numbers. So a quick example of that would be if I took the fraction 1/2, it is equivalent to the fraction 2/4, because I've shaded the same amount of space of my whole, but if I break it into 4 pieces, I colour 2 of them. Whereas if I, sorry, I've just made a mistake there. If I break it into 2 pieces, I only colour 1 of them. So sorry, 1/2 is equal to 2/4. So what we can do is, because we know that percentages are just fractions out of 100, if it's possible, which is not always possible to do, but sometimes we can change the denominator into 100. So if we have a denominator like some of these ones, like 50, 10, and we're going to do some of these in a second, 1,000, 5, 2, any of these numbers that can be multiplied to make 10 or divided, multiplied to make 100 or divided to make 100, we can make an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. So I'll show you what I mean by that. The first one we'll do is 2/50. Now, to turn 50 into 100, we just need to double it. So we multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number, and we end up with 100 on the bottom and 4 on the top. And now that we've got a fraction that's out of 100, we can just straight away write down the percentage, because it's 4 out of 100 and percentages are out of 100. We'll do one now with 10 as the denominator. So we'll start with 1/10. And an equivalent fraction for 1/10 with a denominator of 100. So to get from 10 to 100, we need to times by 10. So we're going to do that to the numerator and the denominator. 10 times 10 is 100. 1 times 10 is 10. And now that it's over 100, we can just write down 10%. This one's a little bit different. We've got 30/1000. So how do we turn 1,000 into 100? Well, it's just got 100 just has one less zero. So to turn 1,000 into 100, instead of multiplying, we're actually going to divide by 10. So we'll divide our numerator and our denominator by 10. 1,000 divided by 10 gives us 100. 30 divided by 10 gives us 3. And therefore, 30/100, or 30/1000, or 3/100 is 3%. And we'll go one last question. Oopsies. This one is going to be a denominator of 5. And we want to make the denominator 100. So how many 5s go into 100? Well, there's 25s in 100, so we're going to multiply our numerator and our denominator by 20. 5 20s are 100, 120 is 20, and therefore we end up with 1/5 is 20%. Now, it's important to remember that we can only do this with fractions that have an equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 100. So if you started with something like 8 on the bottom, you can't really multiply 8 to get 100. So you're not able to come up with an equivalent fraction, and you're better off just using the calculator method in that case. There are ways to do it, but we're not quite up to that yet. So we're going to leave that for a little bit later, after we look at changing decimals into percentages, and then we can look at some other methods as well. But for the time being, if it's a number like 2, 50, 10, 1,000, 5, you might have 20, any of those numbers that can be multiplied or divided to get to 100, you can try the equivalent fraction method. Otherwise, if that's not going to work, just stick to your calculator method, where you're taking the fraction, multiplying by 100, and then writing a percent sign after it.